Mornings in Gaza are rarely quiet, but that day carried a silence that felt deliberate, almost heavy. The sea breeze moved slowly through the narrow streets, carrying with it the smell of salt, dust, and burned concrete. The sky was overcast, not threatening rain, just watching. It was just after dawn when the young imam stepped out of the mosque courtyard, a worn Quran tucked under his arm, his heart steady in a city that had long forgotten what stability felt like. He was not a fighter. He had never held a weapon, never belonged to a faction, never stood behind slogans or flags. His world was small and simple. The mosque, a handful of young men who gathered quietly after prayers, and words that carried weight even when spoken softly. He spoke about patience, about standing firm without hatred, about trusting Allah even when injustice surrounded you. He knew those words were dangerous. In Gaza, hope itself could be seen as a threat. He had just taken a few steps into the street when the sound came. Engines, boots, metal striking metal. The silence shattered. Military vehicles turned into the alley with practiced precision. Soldiers poured out, weapons raised, voices sharp and impatient. Doors were kicked open. Women screamed. Children cried. The imam barely had time to turn before hands seized his arms and twisted them behind his back. The Quran slipped from his grasp and hit the ground. "Don't drop it," he said instinctively, his voice calm despite the sudden pain. The response was the hard strike of a rifle butt against his side. His breath left his body in a single sharp exhale. Someone pulled a cloth over his eyes, tightening it until the world disappeared. He was dragged forward, his feet barely touching the ground, and thrown into the back of a vehicle. As the engine roared to life and the vehicle began to move, he felt the uneven road through his bones. Every turn sent his body crashing against metal, but his mind was strangely clear. He knew this arrest was not routine. He had seen men taken like this before. Some returned broken. Many never returned at all. The vehicle stopped after what felt like an eternity. Rough hands pulled him out. The blindfold was removed and light stabbed into his eyes. He found himself in a small concrete room, damp and narrow, the walls stained with moisture and age. Water dripped steadily from a cracked pipe in the ceiling, echoing in the silence. There was no window, no sign of time. The door slammed shut behind him. That sound carried finality. The first interrogation came quickly. He was dragged into another room, brighter, colder, a table, chairs, faces he couldn't read. "What do you teach them?" a voice demanded. "The Quran," he answered. "Patience, truth." "Who do you work for?" "I work for no one." Each answer brought punishment. Slaps turned into kicks. Kicks turned into long hours of standing without rest. Water was withheld. Sleep became a memory. They wanted him to deny who he was, to say his words meant nothing, to admit that faith was just a disguise. He did none of that. That night, he was thrown back into his cell. His body trembled uncontrollably, pain pulsing through every muscle. He lowered himself onto the cold floor, leaning against the wall, the dripping water counting seconds he could not see. He closed his eyes. "Oh Allah," he whispered, barely moving his lips. "If you have placed me here, then it is not without purpose. Keep my heart firm. Do not let me trade truth for fear." He did not know yet that this prison would become the stage for something far greater than punishment. He did not know that the silence surrounding him was about to be broken, not by screams, but by signs no one inside those walls would be able to explain. This was only the beginning. The cell did not sleep, even when he tried to. Darkness pressed in from every side, thick and unmoving, broken only by the steady drip of water from the cracked pipe above him. Each drop echoed like a countdown, reminding him that the time still existed, even if he could no longer measure it. His body lay still on the cold floor, but his mind refused rest. Pain moved through him in slow waves, settling into his wrists, his shoulders, his ribs. Every breath felt earned. At some point, he could not tell when, the door opened again. Light spilled in abruptly, harsh and blinding. Two soldiers stood there, their faces expressionless. They did not speak. They did not need to. He was pulled to his feet and led down a narrow corridor, his bare feet scraping against concrete stained by years of fear and neglect. The walls seemed to close in as they walked, as if the building itself was listening. The interrogation room was colder than before. A metal chair waited in the center. He was forced into it, his hands secured behind the backrest so tightly that his fingers began to numb. Someone circled him slowly, boots tapping against the floor. "You are not important," a voice said calmly. "This ends if you cooperate." They asked the same questions again, over and over, hoping repetition would weaken him. Who attended his lessons? What did he tell them about resistance? Did he believe Allah supported violence? Each time his answers remained steady. He spoke of mercy, of endurance, of justice that did not require bloodshed. His words only hardened their faces. The beating that followed was methodical, almost routine. Not rage, discipline. Blows designed to hurt but not kill. Pain exploded behind his eyes. His jaw tightened instinctively to keep from crying out. Somewhere deep inside, a strange stillness began to form. It was not numbness. It was surrender of a different kind, the surrender of fear. When they finally stopped, he slumped forward in the chair, breath shallow and uneven. One of them leaned close and spoke softly, almost kindly. "You will not leave this place alive." He was dragged back to his cell and left there without water. Hours passed, or days. Hunger clawed at him, then faded into a dull ache. Thirst was worse. His lips cracked. His tongue felt like stone. At one point, he pressed his forehead against the damp wall just to feel something cool. It was during one of those endless stretches of silence that they brought the paper. Two guards entered and tossed a single sheet onto the floor in front of him. He stared at it without moving. "Read," one of them said. He crawled forward slowly and picked it up. The words were brief, clinical. A sentence written without emotion. Execution by firing squad. No appeal. No date far away. Soon. Very soon. For a moment, the world tilted. The letters blurred. It felt unreal, as if he were reading someone else's name, someone else's fate. He was not ready to die. He had not lived enough to be ready. Faces rushed into his mind, his mother's quiet smile, the old men in the mosque, the young boys who listened with such seriousness when he spoke. That night, sleep never came. He sat against the wall, knees drawn to his chest, breathing slowly to keep his body from shaking. Fear tried to rise, sharp and demanding, but something held it back. He whispered verses under his breath, not loudly, not boldly, just enough to remind himself that he was not alone. Near dawn, the door opened once more. This time, they did not beat him. They simply looked at him. "Tomorrow," one said. The door closed again. He remained seated long after the footsteps faded. Tomorrow. The word echoed in his mind, heavy and final. He imagined the courtyard, the sound of rifles, the moment when everything would end. Yet beneath the fear, another thought began to form. Quiet, unexpected. If Allah had carried him this far, through the pain and the silence, then whatever waited beyond tomorrow was not beyond his reach. As the first faint light of morning crept under the cell door, the Imam lowered his head and spoke a single sentence into the darkness. "O Allah, if this is the end, let me meet it without betraying you." He did not know it yet, but dawn was bringing more than death with it. It was bringing the first fracture in a system built to break him, and the beginning of something none of them were prepared to witness. They came for him before the sun had fully risen. The sound of keys rattling outside the cell pulled him from a shallow half-sleep he had not realized he had entered. His body protested as he stood, muscles stiff, joints burning. The door opened, and for a moment he saw nothing but silhouettes framed by pale morning light. "Move." There was no anger in the voice, no urgency. That calmness frightened him more than shouting ever could. His hands were bound tightly in front of him this time, the rope rough against his skin. As they led him down the corridor, he noticed details he had missed before, The deep scratches on the walls, the dark stains on the floor, the smell of rust and damp stone mixed with something metallic he did not want to name. Other cell doors passed by in silence. He felt eyes on him even though no one spoke. The prison seemed to know what this walk meant. When they stepped outside, the light struck him hard. He squinted instinctively, his eyes burning after so long in darkness. The courtyard was larger than he had imagined, an open square surrounded by high concrete walls topped with wire. In the center stood a thick wooden post, darkened with age and weather, its surface scarred and uneven. He did not need anyone to tell him what it was for. They tied him to it without ceremony. Rope tightened around his wrists, his waist, his chest. Each knot was pulled hard, efficient, practiced. When they were done, he could barely move. The wood pressed cold and unforgiving against his back. A small group of soldiers gathered several meters in front of him. Rifles were checked, magazines locked into place. Somewhere behind him, he could hear low murmurs. Guards, officials, perhaps a few forced spectators. No one met his eyes. One soldier approached with a black cloth in his hand. "Cover his eyes," someone ordered. The imam shook his head slowly. His voice surprised even him when it came out steady. "No." The soldier hesitated, uncertain. He looked back toward the commander. A brief pause followed, then a sharp nod. "Leave it." The soldier stepped away. The imam lifted his gaze as much as the rising sun allowed. The sky was pale, almost colorless, stretching wide above the walls. For a moment, it felt impossibly open compared to the narrow cell he had left behind. He thought of his mother then, not of her grief, but of her hands, how they used to rest gently on his head when he was a child, how she had taught him to make dua before sleep. He did not ask to be saved. He asked only not to be broken. The commander raised his hand. "Ready." Boots shifted, rifles came up, metal clicking softly as they were brought into position. The sound seemed too loud, too sharp in the still air. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat, but beneath the fear there was something else. A strange clarity, as if his soul had stepped slightly aside and was watching. "Fire on my command!" The wind picked up suddenly, brushing dust across the courtyard. He closed his eyes, not to hide, but to focus. "Oh Allah," he whispered silently. "You are enough." The commander's mouth opened to give the order, and then everything stopped. A sharp crack echoed, not a gunshot, but the sound of metal failing. One of the rifles jammed as its trigger was pulled. The soldier frowned, lowered it, struck it once, then tried again. Nothing. Another soldier fired, and his weapon failed too, the bolt locking halfway back. Confusion rippled through the line. "What are you doing?" the commander barked. Before anyone could respond, a sudden gust of wind swept through the courtyard, stronger than before, lifting dust and debris into the air. The flags on the wall snapped violently. Radios at the soldiers' belts crackled, then fell silent altogether. For a brief moment, the courtyard was filled with chaos, shouted orders, soldiers checking weapons, officials arguing loudly. No one looked at the imam. No one noticed him standing there, still bound, still breathing. Then the commander raised his hand again, anger flashing across his face. "Stand down!" The words fell heavy, unbelievable. They untied him roughly and dragged him away from the post. As they pulled him back toward the corridor, he caught a glimpse of the soldiers' faces, not rage, not pity, but something closer to unease. As if the ground beneath them had shifted and they did not understand why. The cell door slammed shut behind him once more. He slid down the wall, his legs giving out beneath him, breath coming in short, trembling gasps. He was alive. He should have been dead. There was no explanation, no announcement, no apology. Only silence, and the undeniable sense that what had just happened was not a delay, not a mistake, but a warning. And somewhere deep inside him, a quiet certainty began to take root. This would not be the last time death came for him, and it would not be the last time it failed. He sat on the cell floor for a long time after they left him there, his back pressed against the damp wall, his wrists still burning where the ropes had been. His breathing slowly steadied, but his thoughts would not. The moment replayed again and again in his mind, the raised rifles, the command about to be spoken, the sudden failure of metal and nerve. He did not feel victorious. He felt shaken, as if he had stepped into a space where rules no longer behaved the way humans expected them to. Footsteps passed outside his cell, then stopped. Someone stood there for a few seconds, close enough that he could hear breathing. No words were spoken. Then the steps moved away. That small hesitation disturbed him more than the beating ever had. It felt like uncertainty had entered the walls. Later that day, a guard slid a cup of water through the opening at the bottom of the door. It was the first water he had received since the night before. The cup shook slightly as it was placed down. When the imam reached for it, he noticed the guard had already stepped back, as if afraid to be too close. The hours that followed were different. Not easier, just different. There were no interrogations, no shouting, no dragging him out. The prison felt subdued, quieter than usual, as though something unseen had settled over it. He listened carefully to the sounds beyond his cell, hushed conversations, radios being checked repeatedly, doors opening and closing without urgency. That evening, the door opened again. 2 soldiers stood there, but their posture was wrong. They did not rush him. They did not grab him. "You're coming," one said, his tone flat. His body tensed automatically. He expected the courtyard again, the post, the rifles. Instead, they led him to the same interrogation room as before. This time, however, no one sat across from him. No questions were asked. He was left alone in the chair for nearly an hour, the silence stretching until it became uncomfortable. Finally, the commander entered. He did not sit. He stood with his arms crossed, studying the imam as if seeing him for the first time. His eyes were sharp, but there was something behind them now. Calculation mixed with irritation. "This changes nothing," the commander said slowly. "Delays happen." The imam did not respond. "You will die," the commander continued, "sooner or later." Still, no response. For a brief second, something flickered across the commander's face. Doubt. He turned sharply and left the room. That night, the imam noticed a change among the other prisoners. When he was led back past the cells, eyes followed him openly now. One man pressed his forehead against the bars and whispered something he could not hear. Another simply nodded once, slowly, with a look that was not pity, but recognition. Back in his cell, the old man who shared the space shifted closer. "I have been here a long time," the man said quietly, his voice rough with age. "I have seen many men taken out like that." He paused. "They do not come back." The imam said nothing. The old man leaned in, lowering his voice further. "This place runs on fear. Today, the fear moved." The words stayed with him. 2 days later, they tried again. This time, they woke him in the middle of the night. Chains were used instead of rope. The courtyard was darker, lit by harsh floodlights that cast long, twisted shadows against the walls. The air was heavy, still, no wind. Everything felt controlled, deliberate. As the preparations began, a vehicle approached the prison gates. The sound of its engine faltered, coughed, then died completely. Shouts erupted near the entrance. Mechanics were called. Time passed. The execution did not happen. He was dragged back to his cell without explanation, the guards visibly angry, cursing under their breath. One of them kicked a bucket so hard it sent water splashing across the floor. When the cell door closed again, the old man laughed softly. "Twice," he said. "This has never happened twice." That night, no one slept. The prison seemed to be holding its breath. Guards whispered more than they spoke. Radios crackled constantly, orders were repeated and questioned. And through it all, the imam felt something settle in his chest. Not confidence, not pride, but certainty. Whatever force had interrupted death once had now done it again. And for the first time since his arrest, it was no longer only the prisoners who were afraid. Fear had begun to change sides. The third attempt came without warning. as if they believed surprise itself could succeed where force had failed. There was no announcement, no night of preparation, no paper pushed across the cell floor. The imam was taken at midday, when the prison was busiest and the sun stood high above the concrete walls, burning away shadows. It felt intentional, visibility as a statement, certainty as a weapon. The courtyard was already prepared when he arrived. The wooden post stood in the same place, unchanged, patient. This time, more soldiers were present. Their formation was tighter, their movements rehearsed. A different energy filled the space. Less anger, more determination. Someone wanted this finished. They bound him again, tighter than before. The rope cut into his wrists, numbing his hands almost instantly. He closed his eyes for a moment, not in fear, but to steady his breath. When he opened them, he noticed something new. The commander was not alone. Standing several steps behind the line of soldiers was a man dressed differently, older, heavier build, his posture rigid. The executioner. This man had done this before. It showed in the way he held his weapon, in the absence of hesitation in his stance. He did not look at the imam. He looked through him. Orders were given, the line adjusted. The courtyard fell silent in that unnatural way that only comes when too many people are trying not to think. The imam lifted his gaze toward the sky again. The sun was harsh, blinding, but he did not look away. His lips moved silently. "O Allah, you see what they cannot." The executioner stepped forward. He raised his rifle and took aim, and then he froze. At first, no one noticed. The silence stretched. The commander frowned. "Shoot," he ordered. The executioner did not move. His hands began to tremble. It was subtle at first, then unmistakable. The rifle lowered slightly. His breathing changed, fast and shallow. He took a step back, eyes wide, fixed on something behind the imam. "What is wrong with you?" the commander shouted. The executioner swallowed hard. Sweat rolled down his temple. His lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. "There is something." The soldiers exchanged confused glances. "I can't," the man said again, louder now. "I can't shoot." He dropped the rifle. It hit the ground with a sharp metallic sound that echoed across the courtyard. The executioner backed away slowly, his face drained of color. "I see a light," he said, voice breaking. "Behind him, it's not normal." The courtyard erupted. Shouts overlapped. Orders were barked. The commander grabbed the executioner by the collar and shoved him forward. "Enough," he snarled. "Do your job." The man shook his head violently. "No, I won't." For a moment it seemed as though he might be shot himself. The tension was unbearable. Then the commander released him, turning instead to the soldiers. "Take the prisoner back." The words were sharp, furious, but final. They untied the imam roughly and dragged him away, but he caught a glimpse of the executioner as they passed. The man had sunk to his knees, his face buried in his hands, shaking uncontrollably. Back in the cell, the imam collapsed against the wall, his entire body trembling. Not from pain this time, but from the weight of what had just happened. He had not seen the light the executioner described. He had felt something, yes, a presence, a calm unlike anything before. But the vision itself had not been given to him. It had been given to them. Word spread through the prison faster than any command ever had. Guards avoided his cell altogether. When food was delivered, it was pushed through quickly, the door never fully opened. Some guards whispered prayers under their breath as they passed. Others made crude signs meant to ward off evil. One young soldier stopped outside the cell that night and spoke in a hushed voice. "What did you do?" The imam answered honestly. "I prayed." The soldier stood there for a long time after that, silent before finally walking away. Inside the prison, something had shifted beyond control. Fear had turned into superstition, superstition into doubt, doubt into questions no one wanted to ask out loud. They had tried 3 times to take his life. 3 times death had stepped back. And now, even the men trained to kill were no longer certain who, or what, stood on the other side of that courtyard. The Imam closed his eyes and rested his forehead against the wall. He did not feel chosen. He felt carried. And somewhere deep within the prison, unseen but undeniable, the balance had begun to tilt. After the third attempt, the prison no longer moved with the same rhythm. It still functioned, doors opened, chains rattled, orders were shouted, but something essential had fractured. The certainty that once held the place together was gone. The Imam felt it even before he saw it. The silence outside his cell was different now, cautious, as if the walls themselves were listening. Food arrived later than usual that day. When it did, the tray slid in slowly, almost respectfully. No insults followed, no kick against the door. He noticed the hands that pushed it through trembled, just slightly. He waited until the footsteps faded before eating, his mind still heavy with the image of the executioner dropping his rifle with the sound it made when it struck the ground. Night came, and with it a soft knock at the bars. It was the young guard, the one who had asked him questions in whispers days earlier. He stood half a step back from the door, eyes darting down the corridor before settling on the Imam's face. He did not unlock the cell. He did not come closer. "My mother," he said quietly. "She is very sick." The Imam said nothing, allowing the words space to breathe. "The doctors say there is nothing more," the guard continued. "She cannot stand. She cannot speak properly anymore." He hesitated, swallowing. "I heard what happened today. I heard what he saw." The Imam understood then. This was not curiosity, it was desperation. "You pray," the guard said, almost pleading. "They say you pray." "I pray to Allah," the Imam replied gently. "He does what he wills." The guard nodded quickly. "That is enough." There were no rituals, no dramatic gestures. The Imam simply turned toward the corner of the cell, raised his bound hands as high as the chains allowed, and spoke softly. He asked for mercy. He asked for healing if it was written, and peace if it was not. He asked for strength, for the mother, and for the son standing outside a prison cell, afraid to hope. The guard listened without moving. When the prayer ended, he said nothing. He simply stepped away, his boots retreating down the corridor faster than usual. 3 days passed. On the 4th night, the same guard returned. This time his face looked different. Paler, yes, but lighter too, as if something had been lifted from his chest. He leaned close to the bars, voice shaking. "She stood up," he whispered. "This morning. The doctors don't understand it. They keep saying the same word, impossible." He looked at the Imam, eyes wet. "I don't know what this means, but I know it wasn't supposed to happen." From that day on, the guard's behavior changed. He no longer insulted prisoners. He no longer struck anyone without orders. When he brought food, the portions were larger. When he passed the Imam's cell, he lowered his gaze, not in fear, but in something closer to reverence. Others noticed. A man imprisoned for theft began sitting closer to the Imam during the brief moments they were allowed outside their cells. At first, he mocked him lightly, asking questions with a crooked smile. Then the questions grew serious. "Do you really believe Allah forgives everything?" the man asked one evening. The Imam met his eyes. "I wouldn't be here if he didn't." The man fell silent after that. More prisoners began to gather, not openly, not in groups, but one by one. A few minutes here, a whispered question there. No sermons were preached, no declarations were made. It was quieter than that. It was men who had lost everything, slowly realizing that perhaps they were not as abandoned as they thought. The prison guards noticed the change too. They tightened schedules, they shortened outdoor time. They tried to scatter the men. But something had already taken root, something that did not need permission or space. One night, the old man in the cell leaned closer to the Imam and spoke with certainty. "This place was built to crush souls," he said. "But something else is growing here now." The Imam closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. He did not feel powerful. He felt fragile, aware that at any moment the same system could try again to erase him. Yet beneath that awareness was a calm that had not been there before, a calm born not of safety, but of trust. He knew they would try again, and he knew now that whatever happened next would not only decide his fate, but expose how far fear could go when it realized it was no longer in control. The fourth attempt did not arrive with chaos or confusion. It arrived with precision. The Imam sensed it before anyone told him. The guards' movements changed, sharper, more disciplined. Shifts rotated differently. Radios were checked constantly. The corridor outside his cell no longer echoed with careless footsteps but with measured pacing. Whatever hesitation had crept into the prison after the third failure was being deliberately erased. This time they were not improvising. Early that morning, the cell door opened without warning. 3 soldiers stood there, not the usual 2. Their expressions were closed, professional. No insults, no threats. "Stand up," one said. Chains were placed on his wrists and ankles, heavier than before. As they let him out, he noticed something else that confirmed his suspicion. The prisoners were not watching this time. Doors were shut, faces hidden. The prison had been silenced intentionally. The courtyard looked different too. More guards, new uniforms, new weapons. A new commander stood near the post, taller than the last, his posture rigid, his gaze cold. This man did not shout. He did not pace. He watched. They tied the Imam to the post again, efficiently, without cruelty or hesitation. No one spoke to him. No one argued. It felt less like an execution and more like a procedure, something meant to be completed without emotion or disruption. The Imam breathed slowly, counting each inhale, each exhale. He did not ask for rescue anymore. He asked for clarity. "Oh Allah," he whispered in his heart. "Whatever you have written, let me walk through it without fear." The new commander stepped forward. "This ends today," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. The firing squad raised their weapons, and then, without warning, the sky changed. Clouds rolled in rapidly, thick and dark, swallowing the pale morning light. Wind tore through the courtyard with sudden force, snapping flags against the walls. Dust rose in spirals, stinging eyes, choking breath. Radios crackled wildly, voices breaking into static. One of the officers shouted something, but his words were ripped away by the wind. The commander looked up, annoyed at first, then uncertain. Within minutes, the courtyard was no longer safe. Loose debris skidded across the ground. One of the floodlights flickered violently and went out. Another sparked, then died. Guards shielded their faces, struggling to keep their footing. "This is unacceptable," the commander snapped. "Proceed." But the soldiers hesitated. Not in panic, something deeper. Instinct. A senior officer moved closer to the commander and spoke urgently, pointing at the sky, at the failing equipment, at the crumbling control of the scene. The commander clenched his jaw. "Untie him," he ordered sharply. "We will not proceed under these conditions." The words landed like a blow. They released the Imam and dragged him back inside, the wind howling behind them as the courtyard gates slammed shut. Inside the corridor, the atmosphere was tense and electric. No one spoke. The guards avoided looking at him as if afraid their eyes might linger too long. Back in the cell, the old man stared at him in disbelief. "4 times," he whispered. "No one survives 4. That night, the prison buzzed with a restless energy. Something was clearly happening beyond the walls. Meetings, discussions, arguments carried out in hushed voices. Orders came and were reversed. Radios crackled endlessly. Then 2 days later, someone new came. He was older, dressed differently, his presence commanding without aggression. When he entered the interrogation room, everyone else stepped back. He spoke calmly, but his words carried weight. "This execution has not followed proper review," he said. "There are procedures, interpretations, authority." The commanders argued quietly, frustration leaking through controlled voices. The man did not raise his tone. He did not need to. If this continues without review, he concluded, it will be an injustice. The decision was immediate. The execution was cancelled. Again. When the imam was returned to his cell, the prison felt changed beyond recognition. Guards looked shaken, not angry. Prisoners whispered openly now, no longer hiding their curiosity. The old man leaned closer and spoke words that stayed with the imam long after. "This is no longer about you," he said. "Something larger is moving, and they know it." That night, for the first time since his arrest, the imam did not prepare himself for death. Instead, he listened. He listened to the prison, its routines, its locks, its shifts. He noticed which doors creaked and which did not, which footsteps belonged to which guards. When the lights dimmed, when the generators kicked in. He did not yet know why his attention had sharpened so suddenly. He only knew that a quiet certainty had taken root within him. The attempts were over. What came next would not be another failure to kill him. It would be something else entirely. The days that followed the fourth cancellation were unlike anything the imam had experienced since his arrest. There were no interrogations, no sudden draggings down the corridor, no shouted orders meant to remind prisoners who controlled their fate. Instead, a heavy stillness settled over the prison, as if decisions were being made somewhere far above the concrete walls, in rooms where names were whispered instead of shouted. For the first time, the imam stopped counting the days as steps toward death. Something inside him shifted. His body remained weak, his wrists still bore the marks of chains, but his awareness sharpened. He began to notice patterns, small, overlooked details that had never mattered before. The guards' shift changes, the timing of the lights, which locks clicked loudly and which slid open with barely a sound. It was not curiosity, it was instinct. At night, he lay awake listening. The prison breathed in cycles. Noise, silence, noise again. Somewhere in that rhythm, he felt a pull, a sense that the story was turning in a direction no one expected. Then came the dream. He was standing inside his cell, but the walls were no longer solid. They were thin, like smoke, transparent. He could see beyond them clearly. The corridor, the stairs, the courtyard, the main gate. There were no guards, no chains, no barriers. He simply walked. Each step felt effortless. He moved through the prison as if it recognized him, as if it no longer resisted his presence. When he reached the main gate, it stood open, swaying gently in the wind, unguarded. Moonlight spilled across the ground beyond it, bright and inviting. He stopped at the threshold. A voice, not loud, not commanding, spoke with certainty. "When it opens, do not hesitate." He woke abruptly, heart racing, breath uneven. For several minutes, he sat in the darkness, trying to calm himself. It had been only a dream, and yet it felt different from dreams he had known before. It was not confusing or symbolic. It was precise. The next day, the sense of anticipation did not fade. If anything, it intensified. The imam found himself watching the corridor more closely than ever, listening harder, waiting without knowing for what. 2 nights later, it happened. Just before midnight, the prison lights flickered. Once, twice, then everything went dark. Shouts echoed from the upper levels, boots ran, radios crackled uselessly. The generator, normally loud and immediate, failed to respond. Darkness swallowed the building completely. The imam stood slowly, every muscle alert. The dream replayed itself in his mind with startling clarity. He approached the cell door, not rushing, not daring to hope. He placed his hand against the cold metal and pushed gently. The door moved, unlocked. For a moment, he froze, his fingers tightening around the bars as disbelief threatened to paralyze him. This was impossible. This door never opened without a key. Never. Behind him, a familiar voice whispered urgently, "Go. Now." It was Khalid, the former soldier who had prayed with him weeks earlier. His face was barely visible in the darkness, but his grip on the imam's arm was firm, resolute. "You can't stay," Khaled said quietly. "This opening is not for all of us. It is for you." The Imam's chest tightened. "What about you?" Khaled shook his head. "Everyone has a role. Yours is beyond these walls." There was no time to argue. The shouting above grew louder. The Imam stepped into the corridor, his bare feet silent against the concrete. He counted his steps just as he had unknowingly practiced. 23 to the corner, 18 to the stairs. Guards ran past on the upper level, distracted, panicked. No one looked down. No one looked at him. At the top of the stairs, 3 guards stood only a few meters away, arguing loudly over a radio that refused to work. A side room door, always locked, stood wide open, papers fluttering in the wind. The Imam held his breath and walked. Not quickly, not slowly. He passed behind them, so close he could hear their breathing. None of them turned. When he reached the main gate, his heart nearly stopped. It was open, just as in the dream. He hesitated for one brief second, thinking of the men still inside, of Khaled, of the life he was leaving behind. Then he remembered the voice. "Do not hesitate." He stepped through. The night air struck his face, cold and sharp, carrying with it the scent of dust and freedom. He did not run until the prison walls were behind him. Only then did his legs carry him forward, away from a place that had tried and failed to claim his life. Behind him, the prison remained locked in chaos. Ahead of him, the road waited, uncertain, dangerous, and entirely open. And the Imam knew, with absolute clarity, that this escape was not chance. It was the next chapter. The Imam did not look back until the prison walls disappeared into the darkness behind him. Even then, he slowed only long enough to steady his breath. His chest burned, his legs trembled, but the night was alive around him, and every sound mattered now. A distant engine, a dog barking somewhere beyond the low rooftops, the wind brushing loose plastic along the road. Freedom, he realized, was not quiet. It demanded attention. He forced himself to walk instead of run. Running drew eyes. Walking, if done with purpose, made him just another shadow moving through a city that had learned to ignore its own fear. His clothes, thin prison fabric, torn at the knees, clung to his skin with sweat. His feet were bare, the ground cold and uneven beneath them. Each step sent a jolt of pain up his spine, but pain was familiar. It no longer slowed him. At the first intersection, headlights swept across the street. He reacted on instinct, diving behind an abandoned cart and crouching low. A military truck rolled past, its occupants laughing at something on the radio, unaware of how close they were to the man they had failed to kill. He waited until the sound faded completely before standing again. He had only one destination in mind, a small house on the far side of the city, owned by an old man who sold tea by day and hope by night. The Imam had visited him once years ago, before the arrests, before the prison. They had spoken little, but understanding had passed between them without effort. If anyone would open a door at this hour, it would be him. The distance felt endless. He avoided main roads, slipping through alleys and narrow passages between buildings. At every checkpoint, he detoured early, trusting memory over sight. Twice he flattened himself against walls as patrols passed within meters of him. Once he nearly collapsed when a flare lit the sky briefly, bathing the street in harsh white light. Each time he moved again only when silence returned. By the time he reached the house, dawn was still hours away. He tapped the door softly in the pattern he remembered. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 quick ones. Nothing happened at first. Then the door opened just enough for a single eye to appear. Recognition came slowly, then all at once. The door swung open and strong hands pulled him inside. The old man stared at him as if he were seeing a ghost. "You're alive," he whispered, as though saying it louder might break the spell. "For now," the Imam replied, his voice hoarse. There were no questions. Water was pressed into his hands. Bread, a blanket. Only after he had drunk deeply did the old man sit across from him, tears tracing silent lines down his face. I prepared myself to bury you, the man said quietly. I never prepared to hide you. You don't have to, the Imam answered. I won't stay long. The old man shook his head. No one leaves without rest, not after a night like that. Before dawn, they moved again, this time to the outskirts, to the home of a widow known only by trust. She did not gasp when she saw him. She did not ask where he had come from. She simply stepped aside and said, "We've been waiting." Inside, his family was there. The moment shattered him. His mother fell to her knees when she saw him, her hands trembling as she reached for his face. She did not cry out. She just touched him again and again, as if confirming he was real. His brothers embraced him silently, questions pressing behind their eyes that there was no time to answer. They had minutes, perhaps less. Allah brought me back to you, he said softly, his voice breaking despite his effort to stay composed. Whatever happens next, remember that. When the truck arrived, it was already loaded with crates of vegetables. A hidden compartment lay beneath the cargo, narrow and suffocating. The Imam climbed inside with a couple and their small child, the space closing around them as the tarp was pulled back into place. As the engine started and the city began to wake, the Imam closed his eyes. The road ahead would be worse than the prison in some ways, longer, more uncertain, with dangers that could not be anticipated. But for the first time since his arrest, he was moving forward, not toward death, toward whatever Allah had written next. And as the truck rolled on, carrying him away from the walls that had failed to hold him, the Imam understood that survival was not the end of his story. It was the responsibility that came with it. The journey did not end when the truck crossed the last checkpoint. In many ways, it began there. Hidden beneath crates of vegetables, the Imam lay motionless as the vehicle slowed again and again, stopped by voices carrying authority and weapons. Dogs barked nearby, their paws scraping against metal, their breath close enough to feel. Each time the truck halted, the air inside the compartment grew thinner, heavier. The child beside him whimpered softly, and without thinking, the Imam pulled her close, resting her head against his chest. He whispered words of comfort, not loud enough to be heard, but steady enough to be felt. At one checkpoint, the barking stopped abruptly. Silence followed, unnatural and complete. No one spoke for several long seconds. The Imam felt a warmth spread through his body, calm and grounding, as if panic itself had been gently pushed aside. The tarp was never lifted. The truck moved on. When they finally crossed into Pakistan late the next day, the tension inside the hidden compartment broke all at once. The mother beside him cried silently, pressing her forehead to the floor. The child slept, unaware of how close fear had come. The Imam closed his eyes, not in exhaustion, but in gratitude. He did not feel triumphant. He felt humbled. They were released outside a quiet town and guided quickly to safe houses, one after another, until the danger of pursuit faded into distance. Days later, when the Imam finally stood alone in a small room on the outskirts of Lahore, he realized how deeply the prison had marked him. Loud noises made him flinch. Darkness carried memories. Even freedom felt unfamiliar, like clothing that did not yet fit. He took a new name. He learned new routines. He worked quietly, helping young men who carried wounds like his. Some visible, many not. At night, they gathered in secret, not to plan or protest, but to remember. To remind one another that faith was not proven by safety, but by perseverance. Sometimes the Imam dreamed of the courtyard, of the wooden post, of the raised rifles that never fired. Other nights he dreamed of the gate swinging open in the wind. In every dream, the same truth followed him into waking life. He was alive not because death had missed him, but because his life had not yet fulfilled its purpose. People asked him how he survived. He never gave dramatic answers. He spoke simply. Allah does not always remove the fire, he said. Sometimes he walks with you through it. The story of his escape spread quietly, carried in whispers, then in testimonies. Some believed, some doubted. The Imam did not argue with either. He knew what he had seen, not with his eyes, but with his life. He had been bound 5 times, condemned again and again, and each time something unseen had intervened. Not loudly, not violently, but decisively. Systems built on fear had faltered. Weapons had failed. Authority had hesitated. Years later, when asked what moment changed him the most, he did not mention the execution attempts or the escape. He spoke instead of the prayer in the cell, offered without certainty of outcome. The prayer made not to survive, but to remain truthful. That, he said, was when I stopped being afraid. The Imam never returned to Gaza. Some doors, once closed by fate, do not reopen. But Gaza never left him. It lived in his prayers, in his work, in the way he listened to others who had known loss and silence. His story stands as a reminder, not that miracles are spectacle, but that they are often quiet, unfolding step by step in places where hope should not exist. It reminds those who hear it that survival is not a reward. It is a responsibility. And if someone listening to his story feels unseen, trapped, or certain that the walls around them will never open, the Imam leaves them with one final truth. There are moments when fear believes it has won. And then, without warning, the door opens, not because the danger is gone, but because Allah has decided that the story is not finished yet.